Hello and welcome to Drishtikon. I'm your host Tesh Kapoor. Today we will investigate how Canada backs, supports, and facilitates terror via non state actors that collaborate with its state and spy agencies. This episode is detailed and very important. It is based on open source, publicly available information and facts. Facts that are extremely disturbing. So let's check. On June 8, 2006, a U.S. House of Representatives Subcommittee on Immigration, Border Security and Claims met and discussed why the border with Canada needed special focus. Why indeed? Because Canada had become a base for fundraising, planning, and plotting for terrorists from around the world. That committee discussed in 1998, the CSIS director testified before Canada's Senate that 50 terrorist organizations, including the world's most notorious, were present in Canada. In terms of numbers of terror groups, this made Canada number 2 in the world after the United States. By 9/11, the previous 20 years had transformed Canada from a terrorist backwater to a significant piece on terror's international chessboard. This was as per Canada's own spy agency. Testifying before a Canadian Senate committee, a CSIS official referred to in the earlier testimonies warned of Canadian residents who were graduates of terrorist training camps and campaigns, including experienced combatants from the conflicts in Afghanistan, Bosnia, Chechnya, and elsewhere. And he added that Canadian citizens or residents had been implicated in terrorist attacks and conspiracies around the world. The 2004 CSIS report, which the US House Committee discussed, had shared that the terrorist groups included Tamil Tigers and major Sikh terrorist groups which had found refuge in Canada. But this was after 9/11. Long back in July 1984, Jagm Singh was shouting menacingly in Madison Square Garden in New York. The occasion was founding conference for the World Sikh Organization. In his book, Cold Terror, How Canada Nurtures and Exports Terrorism Around the World, Canadian journalist Stuart Bell shares that Jagm Singh was saying, "Death to her." The crowd shouted. "Indira bitch," a lone voice called. Indira is Indira Gandhi, the ex-Prime Minister of India. Then they said, "Death to them. Hindu dogs. Long live Khalistan. Long live Babbar Khalsa." You see, World Sikh Organization was basically calling for genocide of Hindus. But this was not all. The Hindus who had never targeted Sikhs. You must remember that 1984 was actually a massacre of one community, the Sikhs, by one political party, the Indian National Congress. But the Hindus had been singled out for extreme hate and violence by Bagri. Any speaker from here on who will say Hindus are brothers will be deemed a traitor of the community, Bagri had told that audience. The Sikh massacres by Congress Party led by Rajiv Gandhi at that time, who was a son of Indira Gandhi and father of Rahul Gandhi. In 1984, these were the events that became the trigger for enhanced Khalistani terror movements within India and outside. However, somewhere along the way, the target of the resulting anger and hate became the Hindus, and not that one political party, the Congress. Canada's security and intelligence groups knew about the funding from Sikh terrorist organizations residing within Canada being sent to the groups in Pakistan and India, which was to be used to target India specifically. You see, Bell wrote in his book that CSIS had admitted in its own report that Sikh militants in North America are a source of financial support for terrorist activities. And that report also said that in Canada, service investigation had revealed that funds are raised through collection of monies from Sikh communities in Canada and transferred to the leadership based in Pakistan and India. In Canada, Babbar Khalsa of Kamloops in British Columbia had used its charitable status to raise funds for that cause. And the cause was terrorism in India. As an aside, in May 2021, multiple grave sites with 215 children's skeletons were found in that same Kamloops in a Canadian residential school. Some of these kids were believed to be as young as 3 years old. And the last state-run residential school in Canada was closed as late as in 1996. You see, the strong urge to attack India with terror attacks within the Khalistani ranks has been recognized and flagged by the CSIS, which is Canada's spy agency, for quite some time. On April 24th, 2018, for example, Bhagat Singh Brar was not allowed to board a flight at the Vancouver International Airport. And the reason? That he was on Canada's no-fly list. On May 17th after that, his business partner, Parvakar Singh Dulai, was also stopped from boarding a flight from Vancouver to Toronto. Same reason. But what had they really done? CSIS had detailed documents stating that Brar was working with Pakistan's ISI to plan an attack in India. That attack was disrupted in 2017. On July 8, 2020, Canada's Global News reported, the service believes that Brar is a Canada-based Khalistani extremist who has been engaged in terrorist-related activities, particularly in fundraising in support of terrorist attacks overseas. And it was not just the CSIS that had that information. The assessment of Brar's activities was shared by Public Safety Canada and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. Interestingly, Parvakar Dulai is friends with NDP chief Jagm Singh, who is a close political associate of Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. But then who was Bhagat Singh Brar? Well, Brar is son of Lakhbir Singh Rode, who's a nephew of Jarnail Singh Bhindranwala, a dreaded terrorist in India who was killed in Operation Blue Star. And this Rode was founder of banned terrorist organization called International Sikh Youth Federation. He was also a close associate of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So what do we have here really? A dreaded terrorist, Brar, on the no-fly list within Canada because the security agencies, all of them in Canada, have specific proof of his terrorist activities, including terror attacks in India. His business partner, Dulai, is subject to the same terror threat assessment by all the Canadian intelligence agencies. And his other associate is Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So one would assume that Nijjar would have been the subject of a similar assessment, right? Well, he was. Canada had him on the no-fly list in 2017 and 18. And the US put him on the no-fly list of their own in 2019. So would Trudeau's government remind us, was that done for exercising his freedom of speech? If he was such a threat to Canada and the US, then these countries would have treated him as a criminal that he was and a terrorist, correct? Wrong. Nijjar was instead warned by the CSIS, Canada's spy agency, about a threat against him. The Time magazine shared in September 2023 that as per Canadian media reports in June of 2023, CSIS had warned Niger that he was being targeted by professional assassins. New York Times also confirmed this collaboration between Canada's spy agency and a terrorist, per its own records, who was funding and orchestrating terror attacks in India. In fact, Niger's Sun shared something even more interesting with the media at that time in September 2023, that the Canadian intelligence officials were meeting his father weekly. Doesn't that sound fishy? He was an associate of guys who were on the Canadian no-fly list and had been responsible for planning and funding terrorist attacks. Niger himself was implicated, not once, but for several terrorist attacks, including deaths of six innocent Indian citizens in a bomb blast in 2007. Why such a concerted effort by the Canadian security and intelligence establishment to mollycoddle and secure this dreaded terrorist and killer of Indian citizens who were backed by a rogue state, the Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI? But wait, this Niger's and Canadian intelligence story gets even more interesting. The core issue that Canada has brought up is that Niger was a Canadian citizen and that he was allegedly targeted by Indian agents, including Indian diplomats. When some people argued about his citizenship, the Canadian Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship confirmed that Niger had become a Canadian citizen on March 3, 2015. It is important to know that India issued its first Red Corner notice, the RCN, against Niger in November of 2014. Oops. Realizing after a day that he had screwed up his government stand, the Canadian minister and his ministry apparently backtracked and backdated his citizenship to May of 2007. That's quite convenient, isn't it? It's important to know that Niger was wanted in India for many cases, including for a 2007 bomb blast of a cinema packed with 600 people. 6 people were killed and 42 injured at that time. So let's review. The fatal terrorist blast in India in November 2007. Niger's revised citizenship date, May of 2007. The Canadian citizenship processing dates have been very conveniently placed just before Niger's act of terror. Intriguing, right? That bomb blast wasn't the only thing that Niger had done. He was consistently planning to target Hindu leaders in India in connivance with Pakistan and with a winking acquaintance of the Canadian intelligence services. So let us ask the question that needs to be asked, given all these rather unbelievably intriguing and inexplicable set of facts. Was the Canadian intelligence complicit in targeting India via non-state actors? The Indian government has officially said in 2023 that Canada is now considered a safe haven for terrorists, for extremists, and for organized crime. This charge assumes importance because of how multiple terrorist and genocidal groups across the spectrum targeting Indian citizens have been converging openly within Canada. On 7th of August 2023, President of NAMTA, North American Manipur Tribal Association, Mr. Lien Gangte, was invited by Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara to speak in the presence of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Whatever we have said and shared is all based on open source, publicly available information. The conclusion that Canada is acting like a rogue state using non state actors to attack Indian citizens in India seems not just plausible, but the only explanation for the rather weird set of behaviors and events that we have just listed. If you think use of open source information available in the public domain is a rather naive way to approach such a serious situation, then we derive comfort from the fact that Canada's Premier Justin Trudeau and Canada's spy agency is ostensibly in the same boat. As David Elby, the Premier of British Columbia, confirmed in September of 2023 that the state of the evidence that he saw was all open source and in public domain. Nothing different from what we have. If that is what it is coming to, then people can draw better conclusion than those in Canada's spy agencies and intelligence agencies trying to smoothen the anger that Trudeau clan has reserved for India and Indians. You see, Pierre Trudeau, Justin's dad and Canadian premier in 1970s, was an enthusiastic backer of Talvinder Singh Parmar, who had fled to Canada after killing 2 police personnel in Punjab in 1981. When asked to extradite the terrorist, Pierre Trudeau's government simply refused. Any ideas on the reason for their refusal? That India did not consider British Queen as the head of state. Case closed. You cannot even fake this level of spectacular absurdity, you see. And if that was not enough, Trudeau Sr. used the flimsiest and fakest argument to stop all Indo-Canadian nuclear cooperation after 1974 peaceful nuclear explosion by India. What started with Pierre Trudeau has continued with Justin Trudeau. Just that, despite his entitlement status in his country, he has little leverage with India. And India of 2024 is not the India of 1974 or 1985 anymore. It will be tough to push India and have Modi government roll over. So we see the US coming behind Canada's claim and offering to buoy its rather pedestrian open source public information backup. And while the current US establishment is doing the dirty work for Trudeau's tantrum play, it is also hopeful that it will be able to use India as a bulwark against China. Does that make any sense? Canada's actions quite firmly establish it in the haloed company of countries like Pakistan, countries that have a winking relationship with non-state actors used to target certain countries on their cue. How high-sounding concepts like rule of law and freedom of speech are used to weaponize these terror actors. The entire concept of rule of law came about during and as a result of colonial pursuit of the British Empire. In fact, law and order and rule of law were considered central to colonial modernity. The rule of law, because of its colonial and imperial genesis, is a tainted instrument. Why? Because rules only favor the Anglo-Saxon countries. They can never be in the wrong, right? If you go by the definition of rule of law in real sense, then Canada is a terror backer and a violator of rule of law itself. Just because it is an Anglo-Saxon country does not absolve it of its own crimes. Heck, this was a country that was potentially killing 3-year-olds of native tribes as late as 1996 in state-run Nazi-style residential schools. Rule of law and democracy indeed. Bottom line is, Canada has no locus standi to be considered a responsible nation capable of being considered a democracy. It is a backer, supporter, and facilitator of terrorism. Its spy agencies have collaborated with known terrorists declared as such and put on no-fly lists, even by Canada's own statements and records and their own state agencies. For such a country to throw around irresponsible statements about India and ask the world to just believe their investigation is a bit rich. The obvious question is, which investigation should we believe in Canada? Where CSIS admitted that Canada is a safe haven and that its citizens are attacking India, or that CSIS collaborated with them on a weekly basis, or the ones now where they are suggesting that they were merely exercising their freedom of speech. What is it? Terror or free speech? All this moral obfuscation won't fly anymore, right?